The morning my grandmother stood up at my cousin's engagement party and said, "I've been sending Audrey $400 a month for 3 years. I felt the floor shift under me. Not because I was surprised she'd been sending money, because I had never seen a single dollar of it. I need to back up. My name is Audrey Callahan. I'm 27 years old and I work as a billing coordinator at a physical therapy clinic in Columbus, Ohio. I share a one-bedroom apartment with a roommate named Lena. I drive a 2014 Honda Civic with a cracked side mirror I keep meaning to fix, and until 8 months ago, I genuinely believed my grandmother had forgotten I existed. That's not self-pity. That's just what I was told in so many ways over so many years that I eventually stopped questioning it. My parents divorced when I was 9. My mother got custody, and my father moved to Phoenix and slowly became a Christmas card, and then not even that. My mother remarried when I was 11. A man named Warren who had 2 kids of his own, a son named Cody who was 13, and a daughter named Jessamine who was 12. Warren was fine. Not warm, not cold. He paid the bills and kept the lights on and treated my mother well, which I think was all she needed after my father. But his mother was a different situation. Her name was Judith Hargrove, and from the moment my mother married Warren, Judith made it her quiet, relentless project to remind everyone in that household that I was not actually part of the family. She never said it directly. Judith was too smart for that. She said it in the way she bought Christmas gifts. One for Cody, one for Jessamine, a card for me with $20 tucked inside, and a note that said for the girl. She said it in the way she talked about Warren's children in front of me, as if I were a neighbor kid who happened to be standing nearby. She said it in the way she organized the family photos on Warren's parents' wall. Cody on the left, Jessamine in the middle, Warren and my mother at the top, and no Audrey anywhere. My mother noticed. I know she did, because sometimes I'd catch her looking at me with this expression I can only describe as guilty helplessness. But she never said anything to Judith, and I never said anything to my mother. We were both very good at not saying things. My grandmother, my real grandmother, my father's mother, was named Ruth. Ruth Callahan. She lived in Dayton, about an hour and a half from us, and after my father left, contact with her became complicated in the way that contact with your ex-husband's family always becomes complicated when you're a woman trying to move forward with your life. My mother wasn't cruel about it. She didn't forbid anything. But the invitations stopped coming, and I was 9 and then 11 and then 13, and I didn't know how to call my grandmother and say I miss you. So I didn't. I assumed Grandma Ruth had moved on too, that she'd taken my father's side, or simply let the distance become permanent the way adults sometimes do. I was wrong. I just didn't know it yet. The years passed the way they do when you're a kid who learns to make herself small. I got good grades because school is the one place where I had some control. I worked part-time at a sandwich shop from the time I was 16. I saved everything I could, which was never very much. When I was 18, I got into Ohio State, not a full scholarship, but enough aid that with loans and the money I'd saved and working 20 hours a week, I could make it work. I didn't ask my mother and Warren for help with college. Partly because I knew their money was stretched with Cody and Jessamine's needs. Partly because asking felt like admitting I couldn't do it on my own. Partly, if I'm being honest, because I was afraid of what it would mean if they said no. So for a year, I got a parking ticket I couldn't pay. I bounced a check for the first time. I started skipping meals toward the end of the month when my account got low. I took on a second job on weekends at a grocery store, and I was so tired that I fell asleep in the campus library twice with my face on my textbook. I told no one. Junior year, things got a little better. I switched my major from pre-med, which I'd chosen because I thought I should, to healthcare administration, which I was actually good at. My grades improved. I cut the grocery store shifts down to 1 day a week. I felt, for the first time, like I might be okay. I graduated in 4 years. My mother and Warren came to the ceremony. Judith sent a card with, I am not making this up, $15 in it and a note that said congratulations to Warren's stepdaughter. Cody and Jessamine got cards for their college graduations. I got the card. I moved to Columbus, found the job, found Lena, started paying down my loans. Life was not glamorous, but it was mine, and I had built it entirely by myself, and I was proud of that, even when I was also exhausted by it. And then, 3 years after graduation, Jessamine got engaged. The engagement party was at Judith's house. Of course it was. Judith lived in a 5-bedroom colonial in Dublin, the kind of suburb where every lawn is the same shade of aggressively maintained green, and every car in the driveway is less than 3 years old. The party was catered. There was a balloon arch in Jessamine's colors, blush and ivory, and a dessert table with a 3-tier cake that said "She said yes" in gold lettering. I was invited because my mother asked me to come, not because Judith wanted me there. I knew that the moment I walked in, and Judith looked at me with that smile she has, the one that doesn't reach her eyes, and said, "Oh, Audrey, you made it. We weren't sure you'd be able to get away from work." I smiled back. I was very good at smiling back by now. The party was fine. Jessamine was happy, glowing the way people glow when they're 24 and engaged, and their grandmother has just thrown them a party with a balloon arch and a 3-tier cake. Her fiancé, Marcus, was kind and a little nervous in the way that men are when they're meeting a large family all at once. I liked him immediately. I was standing near the dessert table, nursing a sparkling water and thinking about whether I could leave by 8 without it being obvious, when Grandma Ruth walked in. I didn't know she was coming. My mother hadn't mentioned it. I hadn't spoken to Grandma Ruth, and I had to actually count backwards in my head. 6 years. Not since my grandfather's funeral, when we'd hugged briefly in the church hallway and I'd cried more than I expected to. And then life had pulled us apart again, and I hadn't known how to pull back. She looked older, smaller. Her hair was completely white now, and she walked with a cane I didn't remember her needing before. But her eyes were the same, gray and sharp and warm, all at once, the way winter sunlight is. She saw me immediately, and she stopped. "Audrey," she said, and the way she said it, like she was relieved, like she'd been waiting, made my chest hurt in a way I wasn't prepared for. "Grandma Ruth," I said, "I didn't know you were going to be here." "I asked to come," she said simply. "I needed to see you." We found a quiet corner near the back of Judith's living room, away from the balloon arch and the noise. We talked for 20 minutes about Columbus, about my job, about her garden in Dayton and her neighbor's dog who kept digging under the fence. Normal things, careful things. We were both testing the ground between us after 6 years of silence. And then Judith called everyone into the main room for the toast. I should explain the seating arrangement at that point, because it matters. Judith was at the front of the room, next to Jessamine and Marcus. My mother and Warren were to the left, with Cody and his girlfriend. I was standing a few feet behind them, next to Grandma Ruth. About 40 people total, all of Judith's friends and Warren's extended family and a few of Jessamine's college friends. Judith gave her toast. It was long and specific in the way that toasts are when the person giving them wants everyone to know how central they are to the story. She talked about watching Jessamine grow up, about the memories they'd made, about how proud she was. She talked for about 4 minutes without mentioning my mother once. I watched my mother's face stay very still, and then Judith finished, and there was applause, and Marcus's mother stood up to say a few words, and then someone called out, "Does anyone else want to say something?" Grandma Ruth raised her hand. I don't know what I expected. A nice memory. A gentle congratulations. She was 81 years old, and she'd come with a cane, and she'd only met Jessamine twice. She stood up slowly, and someone handed her a glass of champagne, and the room got quiet. "I want to say congratulations to Jessamine and Marcus," she said, and her voice was clearer than I expected, steadier. "I wish you both so much happiness." She paused. "But I also need to say something else, while I have the room." I saw my mother's head turn very slightly toward Warren. I saw Warren's jaw tighten. "For the past 3 years," Grandma Ruth said, "I have been sending $400 a month to help my granddaughter Audrey with her expenses. I set up the transfers myself, through my bank. I sent them to the account I was given." The room was completely silent. Last month, I called my bank to check the records because I hadn't heard from Audrey about any of it, and I started to wonder. The account I'd been sending money to for 3 years. It wasn't Audrey's. She looked directly at Warren. The account was in your name. I don't have the right words for what happened in my body in that moment. It was like being told the floor you'd been standing on your entire life was actually 2 feet lower than you thought, and you'd been falling this whole time without knowing it. $400 a month. For 3 years. $14,400. I had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for dinner because I couldn't afford groceries. I had skipped my annual physical for 2 years because the copay was tight. I had cried in my car in the parking garage of my apartment complex because my transmission was making a noise, and I didn't have $800, and I didn't know what I was going to do. $14,400. And it had been going to Warren. Warren's face had gone the color of old paper. My mother had both hands pressed over her mouth. Cody was looking at his feet. Jessamine had stopped glowing. That's not, Warren started. I have the records, Grandma Ruth said. Her voice didn't waver. My attorney has copies. The account number, the transfers, all 3 years of them, 43 transfers. Grandma Ruth, that was my mother's voice, very small. I didn't know. I believe you, Grandma Ruth said, and I could hear that she meant it. That's why I didn't call the police before coming here tonight. I wanted to give everyone the chance to explain themselves in person. No one explained anything. The room stayed silent for a long moment, the kind of silence that has weight and texture to it, that presses against your ears. Jessamine's friends were looking at each other. Judith was standing very still with her champagne glass held so tightly I thought it might break. I looked at Warren. He looked back at me. And then he looked away. We left the party within the hour. My mother rode with me, which felt significant. She chose my car over Warren's. Without a word about it, just walked to the parking lot beside me and got in the passenger seat. We sat in the driveway for a few minutes before I started the engine. The house was lit up inside. I could see people moving around through the windows. Did you know? I asked. No, she said. I believed her. I'm not sure why I believed her so easily, except that I knew my mother's tells, had known them since I was 9 years old, and she wasn't lying. She was devastated and ashamed, but she wasn't lying. How long have you and Warren had a joint account? Since we got married. So the money had been going into an account my mother technically also had access to. Whether she'd ever noticed the deposits, I don't know. Probably they'd been easy to overlook. $400 every month in an account that had other regular activity, not impossible to miss if you weren't looking. Or maybe she had noticed and told herself a story about it. I don't know. I've thought about this a lot. I don't have a clean answer. I'm sorry, she said. I know. Audrey, I am so sorry. I started the car. Grandma Ruth's attorney. A woman named Claire who had the kind of calm, organized energy that made you feel like everything was going to be handled, called me the following week. She explained the situation clearly and without drama, which I appreciated. Grandma Ruth had discovered the discrepancy when she'd called her bank to increase the monthly amount. She'd been planning to send $500 instead of $400, because she'd read that living costs in Columbus were rising and she wanted to make sure I had enough. The bank representative had read back the account on file. Grandma Ruth had recognized immediately that it wasn't mine. She'd spent 2 weeks verifying everything before the party. She had bank statements going back to the first transfer. She had the original account number she'd been given, which Warren had provided 3 years ago, after Grandma Ruth had called my mother's house looking for me and Warren had answered and suggested he could pass along the information for her. That was the part that made me sit down. He had answered the phone. He had heard my grandmother say she wanted to help me, and he had said, I'll take care of it. Claire told me that Grandma Ruth wanted to pursue civil recovery, the full $14,400 plus interest. She also wanted me to know that regardless of what happened with Warren, she was setting up a direct account in my name immediately, and the $400 a month would continue. She wants to make something clear to you, Claire said. She's been trying to reach you for years. She sent birthday cards. She sent Christmas cards. She's been calling your mother's house. I thought about that. I thought about whether any of those cards had ever arrived. I thought about who checked the mail in the house where I grew up. She never stopped thinking about you, Claire said. She wants you to know that. I had to put the phone down for a minute. The legal process took about 5 months. Warren did not, as it turned out, have a good explanation. His attorney, he hired one almost immediately, which told you something, argued that there had been a misunderstanding, that Warren had believed the money was intended for household expenses related to my care. This argument collapsed when Claire pointed out that I had not lived in that household for 6 years, having left for college and then Columbus well before the transfers began. The judgment came down in Grandma Ruth's favor. Warren was ordered to repay the full amount plus 7% interest, which brought the total to just over $15,000. He was also required to pay attorney's fees. He and my mother separated before the judgment was finalized. I don't think the legal case caused the separation exactly. I think it revealed a version of Warren that my mother could not reconcile with the man she thought she'd married. But I won't pretend I know exactly what happened in their marriage. That's between them. My mother called me the night she asked him to leave. We talked for 2 hours. It was the longest, most honest conversation we'd had since I was a child. She cried. I cried. We said things we'd been not saying for 15 years. It didn't fix everything, but it was a start. Grandma Ruth came to Columbus in the spring. I drove to her hotel and picked her up, and we went to a diner near my apartment, the kind with laminated menus and excellent coffee and booths that are slightly too small but feel cozy anyway. We sat for 3 hours. The waitress refilled our coffee cups so many times she eventually just left the carafe on the table. I asked her why she'd done it the way she did, standing up at the party, saying it in front of everyone. She could have called me. She could have called Warren directly. She could have gone straight to the lawyers. She wrapped her hands around her coffee cup and looked at me for a moment before she answered. I thought about all of those options, she said. I spent 2 weeks thinking about them. And the thing is, Audrey, when something wrong has been happening quietly for a long time, I don't think quiet is the right way to end it. She set the cup down. That family made you invisible for years. Very quietly, very politely, they just erased you. From the photos, from the conversations, from the money that was supposed to be yours. And I thought if I handled this quietly, behind closed doors, they'd find a way to make that disappear too. To minimize it, to tell a story where it was a misunderstanding and everyone moved on. She looked at me steadily. I wanted it on record. I wanted 40 people in that room to know what had been done to you. Because it had been done to you and it wasn't small, and it deserved to be said out loud. I didn't say anything for a moment. Outside the diner window, a city bus rolled past, and a kid on a bicycle weaved around a parked car, and the ordinary Columbus morning continued without knowing that I was sitting in a booth having a conversation that was rearranging something inside me. Thank you, I finally said. It felt inadequate. You don't have to thank me, she said. I'm your grandmother. I'm sorry it took me this long. The $15,000 arrived in my account in 2 installments over 90 days, as the court had ordered. I paid off the last of my student loans. I fixed the cracked side mirror on my Civic. I put 3 months of expenses in a savings account, because I had never in my adult life had 3 months of expenses in a savings account. And the feeling of it, the simple, quiet security of it, made me understand for the first time what I'd been missing. Not the money exactly, the ground beneath my feet. I also did something else. I'd been wanting to take a certification course in healthcare management. It would qualify me for a promotion track at work, but it cost $1,800 and I'd been putting it off for 2 years because I couldn't make the numbers work. I enrolled in April. I finished in August. My manager called me into her office in September and we talked about what the next 2 years could look like. I still work at the same clinic. But things look different from here. Jessamine texted me about 6 months after the party. It was a long message, longer than I expected. She said she'd had no idea. She said she was sorry. She said she understood if I didn't want to have a relationship with her, but that she hoped someday I'd be open to it. I appreciated the message. I haven't responded yet. I'm not ready, and I think that's okay. Cody hasn't reached out. That's also okay. Judith sent a letter. An actual physical letter, which surprised me. She did not apologize for anything specific. She said she hoped I was doing well in Columbus and that whatever had happened in the past, she wished me all the best going forward. I read it twice and then I put it in the recycling. Grandma Ruth and I talk every Sunday now. Sometimes for 10 minutes, sometimes for an hour. She tells me about her garden. I tell her about work. Last month, she sent me a photo of herself holding a zucchini the size of a small child, with a note that said record harvest, had to document. I have it on my refrigerator. She is 81 years old and she drives herself to church and maintains a garden and keeps her accounts with the precision of a woman who has been managing money seriously her entire life. She's the sharpest person I know. I think about the version of myself who believed she'd been forgotten by her grandmother, who carried that quiet grief around for 15 years like it was just part of who she was, who learned to make herself small in rooms where she was unwanted and called it getting along. I don't blame that girl. She was doing the best she could with what she'd been told. But she was wrong about being forgotten, and knowing that changes things. Not everything. Not the years of peanut butter dinners. Not the parking tickets. Not the car crying sessions. Those happened. They're part of my story. But so is the Sunday morning when my grandmother stood up in a room full of people and said my name like it mattered. So is every Sunday phone call since. So is the zucchini on my refrigerator. I am 27 years old, and I know who I am, and I know who is in my corner, and I know what I am worth. That's more than I knew a year ago. That's enough to build on. I've spent a lot of time thinking about how things unfold the way they do, not in a mystical way. I don't think the universe was keeping score or that Warren eventually got what he deserved because of some invisible cosmic ledger. I think it's simpler than that. And in some ways harder to accept. People who do quietly harmful things almost always count on quiet to protect them. Warren never announced what he was doing. He didn't brag about it. He just answered a phone call from an old woman who wanted to help her granddaughter, nodded along, and redirected the money somewhere else. He counted on the fact that I didn't know Grandma Ruth was trying to reach me. He counted on the fact that she was far away and getting older and probably wouldn't check. He counted on the silence that had grown between us over years of distance. And he used it, and for 3 years it worked. What he didn't count on was that Grandma Ruth would try to give more. That's the part I keep coming back to. She called the bank to increase the amount because she was thinking about me, genuinely thinking about me, worrying about rising costs, wanting to make sure I had enough. And that single act of care, that one phone call made out of love, unraveled 3 years of calculation in about 45 seconds. There's something worth sitting with there. Not a lesson exactly, more like an observation about how things actually work. Harm tends to sustain itself through indifference. It needs people not to live too closely, not to ask questions, not to care enough to double-check. The moment someone cares actively enough, the moment Grandma Ruth picked up the phone, not to check on the money but to give more of it, the whole structure fell apart. I think about that when I feel like being careful doesn't matter, or like staying connected to people costs more than it's worth. It matters. Staying connected matters. Grandma Ruth reaching for me even when I didn't know she was reaching. That's what changed everything. Not a confrontation I initiated, not some moment where I finally stood up for myself. Just an 81-year-old woman in Dayton who decided to be a little more generous and accidentally dismantled a 3-year lie. And for my part, I'm not proud of how small I'd let myself become. I learned early that the way to survive in rooms where you're not really wanted is to take up less space, ask for less, expect less. That felt like strength for a long time. It wasn't. It was just a very convincing imitation of it. Real strength, I think, is what Grandma Ruth has. The willingness to stand up in a room full of people and say a true thing out loud, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it changes everything. I'm still learning that. I'm not there yet. But I know what it looks like now. It looks like an 81-year-old woman with a cane and a glass of champagne and 30 years of quiet love finally finding its way home. I am 27. I have a savings account with 3 months of expenses in it. I have a certification on my wall and a promotion on the horizon and a zucchini photo on my refrigerator. I have a grandmother who calls every Sunday. I have enough. And I know now what enough actually feels like.